Guess what happened again? You guessed it, I met another girl. And it's kind of habit for me, you know. We also got married in the Indian way. Now, her name was Lizzie Arms, and she and I had a boy. His name was Joel Anthony Cotter. And then in 1875, we had a little girl. Her name was Huldah Bonwell Cotter. And we lived together as a family, really most of the time thereafter. But I'd always been interested in helping our people get ahead, and we had lots of problems. The federal government wasn't carrying through on a lot of their treaties, a lot of the promises they made about what would happen if we moved to Indian Territory. And finally, the tribe appointed three of us, myself and Matthew Mudeater and John Serhas, and the three of us went to Washington, jumped on a train, and when we got there, we talked with some government officials and managed to do a little good, not as much as we had hoped for, but at least we did get some money for our kids and for their school, and that was one of the most important things we were hoping for, and we did accomplish that goal. And of course, you know about Mr. Mudeater. He's buried here, very prominent member of the tribe and former chief. And sometime along there in the 1860s, early 1870s, I met a fella that really changed my life, probably more than any of the other two guys I mentioned, Fremont or Quantrill, ever did. His name was Jeremiah Hubbard. Anybody ever hear of Jeremiah Hubbard? All right, he was one of the best men I ever met. He was a Quaker missionary and a teacher, and he was here in northeast Oklahoma with the goal of trying to preach to the Indian tribes and convert folks, make Christians, and he asked me to be his translator and to be his guide, and I agreed to do that. And we called him Uncle Jerry, by the way. He was one of the kindest men I ever knew. Uncle Jerry and I traveled around this part of the country for several years and managed to accomplish quite a bit of his goal in making people who had been, as far as he knew anyway, never exposed to the scriptures, the gospel, making Christians out of them. And he even succeeded in converting me. And that was probably his biggest accomplishment, I suppose. At least my wife thought so. Every now and then, I get to thinking about the old days. And, you know, back in those days when Uncle Jerry and I were traveling around, we didn't have any hotels or motels to stay in. We stayed with folks if they were willing to put us up. And some of them, Matthias Splitlog, I think you probably heard of him, and Irv Long, you've already heard about. We'd stay with those fellows, and frankly, some of us old guys would stay up nearly all night long just talking about the good old days. You know, no matter how bad something is, after some time goes by, you look back, and they're the good old days. And actually, in a lot of ways, they were. In 1879, Uncle Jerry said that he thought that Lizzie and I, we'd been married in the Indian way, but he said that he thought we ought to be married by a preacher in a church and according to the Bible. And I knew that pleased Lizzie, so on the 12th of November, 1879, he married us. And at that time, I was 57, I think. Kind of lose track of those things. Lizzie was 40, and Joel Anthony was 17, Huldah was 10, and my first child, Caroline, she was grown up and by that time had married a fellow by the name of John Spicer. Any Spicers around here? Nope. Well, anyway, life continued to be pretty good, and in 1880 I was elected the principal chief of the Wyandotte tribe. I served for 2 years. Mostly we handled things like, family matters, land matters. We were just kind of a sort of like not just a tribal government, but sort of like a court, I suppose you'd say. And about that time, and well, it was actually in 1885, I sent my son Joel to the Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Anybody ever been to Carlisle? The Carlisle Indian School there? Well, anyway, he spent 3 years at the Carlisle Indian School. He got a good education. He came back, and I will have to say this about all of my kids. Sometimes they probably didn't have as much help from Dad as they might have, but they all turned out real good. And Joel was no different than the others. And then, in 1888, something bad happened, at least as far as I was concerned. I died. Nobody knows why. I wasn't feeling bad. I wasn't sick. Didn't have anything particularly wrong with me. Just one day, I just keeled over and died. And as Mr. Devine said, I'm buried someplace back here by these trees. Nice, peaceful, quiet place. And, looking back over my life, I never have really thought too much about it until I started thinking about what I was going to tell you today. And really, I think you'd have to agree that I had a fairly adventurous life. Traveled to Canada, or born in Canada, then traveled to Kansas. Well, actually Ohio first and then Kansas. Then to Oklahoma, from Oklahoma to California, California back to Kansas, and then to Washington, D.C. And I was a husband, a father, a ferryman, a warrior, a soldier, a scout, a missionary translator. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I was a singer, too. I wasn't real proud of that. But Uncle Jerry, when we were doing these church meetings, he had asked me to lead the singing. And I will tell you, I am not a singer, but Uncle Jerry didn't seem to mind because he didn't want to do it either. But nevertheless, I served then as, of course, chief of the Wyandottes for 2 years. And I might add, my grandson, Leonard Nicholas Cotter, also served as chief of the Wyandottes, either chief or second chief for a period of 38 years, and he named his son after me. He named him Nicholas Cotter. And I was hoping Nicholas would be here today, but I don't see him. I think he'll be in tomorrow. Nevertheless, in summary, I guess I'd say I had a life that suited me pretty much, and I thank you all for coming to visit me. You know, it gets lonesome out here. Having been here for 128 years, you get accustomed to talking to the same folks. You told the same old stories over and over. And even though Matt Mudeater and Irva Long and some other friends are here, we all know everything there is to know about each other. And it's just kind of nice to have folks to come that you haven't talked to before and have a little somebody new to talk to. So I appreciate you being here. Thanks a lot. And don't forget old Nick Cotter, okay?